The Veritasium one's really interesting. Okay. If you think we'll learn something, that's the point. He killed the most people in history. Where was that? It just says whoops.
One single scientist created 3 inventions that accidentally caused the deaths of millions of people, including himself. Not only that, they decreased the average intelligence of people all around the world, increased crime rates, and caused 2 completely separate environmental disasters that we are still dealing with today.
It's fucking Riot Tryndamere making League of Legends. Human intelligence drops worldwide, anger, violence, riots, death.
In 1944, as a young chemist who had just finished his master's, Claire Patterson went to work on the Manhattan Project, building the first nuclear weapons. His job was to concentrate uranium-235, the fissile fuel for bombs, from the much more common uranium-238.
Okay.
And this required huge machines, mass spectrometers, which separated the 2 types of uranium by their slight difference in mass.
Okay.
After the war, Patterson went back to grad school to get his PhD. He picked a research project that would take advantage of his experience with mass spectrometers, measuring the age of the Earth.
Okay.
Radioactive rocks are effectively clocks. Uranium-238, for example, decays into thorium, and then protactinium, and then 12 more decays, until it ends up as lead-206, which is stable. The rate of this decay is consistent and can be measured. It takes 4.5 billion years for half
Around
of a sample of
1.3
U-238 to decay into lead-206.
Patterson's PhD project was to determine the age of the Earth by measuring the ratio of uranium to lead in primordial rocks.
Okay, but what if 7,000 years ago, when God created it all, he just set a certain arbitrary amount of lead? Checkmate, okay? What if God literally just picked a ratio of lead out of his ass? Or her ass? Sure.
But Patterson's lead measurements were all over the place, and they were many, many times higher than they expected.
We take George's uranium and my lead. Not right, Patterson. There was lead there that didn't belong there.
So where was all this extra lead coming from? That mystery would take over the rest of Claire Patterson's life and bring him to the literal ends of the Earth.
Okay. That shot
In
is
1908, a woman was driving across the Belle Isle Bridge in Detroit when her car stalled. A passing motorist stopped to help. In those days, cars needed to be hand-cranked to start. He knelt down and turned the crank, and the engine roared to life, a little too suddenly. The man couldn't get out of the way, and the crank handle hit him in the face and broke his jaw. He died as a result.
What a fucking terrible way to die. That's crazy. That's why you never help women. That's the lesson. If you try to help a woman, you will die. That's, I believe, the takeaway. I think that's what, damn, that's why chivalry is literally dead. That's crazy. That sucks. What a terrible way to die.
His name was Byron Carter, and he was the founder of his own car company. So he was well connected in the Detroit auto scene.
Damn, what an aura loss to be like, yeah, I'm kind of a car guy. Okay, he's been long enough dead, we can make fun of it, right? To be like, yeah, don't worry, ma'am, I'm a car guy. I can get this fixed. Don't worry, I'll have you. I actually own my own car company. And then, blam! Oh, and you bleed out. It's crazy. That is just a crazy aura loss.
He counted among his close friends the founder of Cadillac, Henry Leland. Leland was so distraught over his friend's death that he resolved to eliminate hand cranks from his vehicles. Leland hired Charles Kettering to create a self-starting car, and by 1911, he had a working prototype. The world's first crankless car was the Cadillac Model 30. It was much more powerful than cars before it. It had a top speed of 45 miles per hour and 40 horsepower, double the Ford Model T. The Model 30 was a huge success for Cadillac, doubling the company's annual sales. But it had a problem. It was deafeningly loud. In internal combustion engines, a piston compresses the fuel-air mixture, which is then ignited by a spark from the spark plug. The expanding hot gases push the piston back down. The problem with the Model 30 engine was it compressed the fuel-air mixture more than previous models. So much, in fact, that often the fuel would spontaneously combust before the spark from the spark plug. So rather than orderly, perfectly timed explosions, you'd get multiple haphazard combustions leading to turbulent pressure waves inside the cylinder. The resulting sound led the problem to become known as engine knocking.
I learned something right there. I didn't know that's what engine knocking came. I don't know what the sound, when you hear that sound, I did not know that's why it happened. That's cool.
Knocking wasn't just hard on the ears, it hurt the engine's performance. It reduced power output and lowered fuel efficiency. The vibrations also damaged the piston and walls of the cylinder, shortening the life of the engine. The good news was that engine knocking could be corrected by changing the fuel. Different fuels can withstand different levels of compression before detonating. N-heptane, for example, will spontaneously combust under only a little compression. Isooctane, on the other hand, can withstand a much higher compression ratio before it auto-ignites, so it's much less likely to cause knocking. To quantify how much compression a fuel can withstand, scientists came up with the octane rating system. They arbitrarily set isooctane to have a rating of 100 and N-heptane a rating of 0. Now, real fuels aren't made up of only these two ingredients. They're a mix of lots of different hydrocarbons, but the octane rating tells you what mixture of octane and heptane gives equivalent
Damn, I didn't know this at all. That's cool.
For example, 98 octane fuel can withstand the same compression as a mixture of 98% octane and 2% heptane. Now, I'm going to take a little bit of 98 octane fuel and put it in this piston, and when I compress it, nothing happens.
That's going to be so annoying for Ari next time we're at a gas station and I'm explaining explaining the different octanes and what they mean. It's going to be such a pain in the ass for her. If I remember it, I'll make it up. I'll tell her it's God's will.
This fuel can withstand a lot of compression. Diesel has an octane rating of 20, so it acts like a mixture of 20% isooctane and 80% N-heptane. If I put a little bit of diesel in there, let's see what happens with the same compression ratio.
That's cool.
There you go. You get a little explosion in there. That's because this is a low octane fuel. I mean, that's what diesel's meant to do. You compress it and it ignites. But you don't want this sort of fuel in an engine with spark plugs. The reason fancy cars demand high octane fuel is to prevent knocking in their high compression, high performance engines. Kettering wanted to find an additive which would increase the octane rating of ordinary fuel and eliminate knocking in high compression engines. So he hired 27-year-old engineer Thomas Midgley Jr.
Is this connected to saying high octane action? Yes. Yes, it's all making sense, dude. That is actually something that I have undeniably learned today, which is cool. It's a good video. I did not know where the octane rating system went from, and I didn't know what it was, the purpose of it. I always just bought the cheapest one. I thought it was kind of like a fancy-pantsy. I mean, I've always thought of it more as a marketing gimmick, to be honest. I always thought that like the high octane fuel was like for rich people to spend more for fancy cars. But I was like, they all run the same. Like, what the f? But low key, there's a chemical reason. They all taste the same. No, that's where you're wrong. No, I think high octane has a little bit of a sweeter, crisper taste, okay?
Midgley experimented with all sorts of compounds, from melted butter and camphor to ethyl acetate and aluminum chloride. He later wrote most of them had no more effect than spitting in the Great Lakes. Ethanol was an interesting exception. It did stop the knocking, but you needed a lot of it, about 10% of the fuel mixture for it to be effective. That much ethanol would be expensive and hard to turn a profit on. And Midgley was really after an additive that was cheap, easy to produce, and effective even at low concentrations.
It wasn't just that ethanol was slightly more expensive. After all, ethanol is commonly used in gasoline today. But ethanol was already widely known at the time, which meant it couldn't be patented by Midgley. This meant he wouldn't make anywhere near the amount of money with ethanol that he could by inventing something completely new.
So he kept trying. Then he hit on tellurium. It worked wonderfully as an anti-knock agent, but it had a terrible smell. You couldn't get rid of it by changing clothes or bathing. His wife was so offended by the stench that he had to sleep in the basement for 7 months. Midgley wrote, I don't think that although this doubled the fuel economy, humanity would suffer this smell.
Dude, that's funny. Some fucking chatter just said lol fart Atrioc. Do you think that was me on the screen? Do you think I invented Tetrium in fucking, what are you talking about? And also, even if I did, that doesn't mean I'm farting. You think I farted so much and then blamed it on the dude, that'd be so funny. Imagine this dude actually just fucking reeked, but he blamed it on Tetrium so his wife... What if there's a chemical that could have like drastically increased the global fuel economy, but we never found out about it because this guy kept ripping ass? No, babe, it's the Tetrium. I'm actually a scientist. No, he doesn't look like me. I have a beard.
On December 3rd, 1921, after 5 years of working on the problem, Midgley found what he thought was the perfect solution: tetraethyl lead. That's a lead atom right there in the center. This additive was exactly what he was looking for. It stopped the knocking, it didn't smell, it was cheap to produce and readily available. Best of all, you only needed 1 part in 1,000 for it to be effective.
In a call to Kettering, Midgley said, "Can you imagine how much money we're gonna make with this? We're gonna make $200 million, maybe even more." That is over $3 billion in today's dollars.
Now, for his discovery, the American Chemical Society gave him the prestigious Nichols Award.
He thought he was gonna get $200 billion and only got 1 nickel? Broke ass?
He and Kettering patented the process for making tetraethyl lead, and they called their new additive ethyl.
So this is where unleaded gas comes from? We're getting to this whole, this is explaining the whole gas station to me.
They made no mention of lead. Then they teamed up with 3 of America's largest corporations, General Motors, DuPont, and Standard Oil of New Jersey, to form the Ethyl Corporation.
Their marketing was brilliant.
No man can look at the amazing record of accomplishment here in this research division without confidence that these men are going ahead with an eye to the future, looking for new facts and principles which will make things better and make life easier for all of us.
At the 1923 Indian...
That's a good ad. Your son will be embarrassed of you, slow ass, if you don't get ethyl. Your progeny will look upon you with shame. Your kids will call you a cuck. Unless you get ethyl gasoline. That's very funny. This one is not as good. This is just a big swordfish and it says, as powerful as ethyl gasoline. That's a shit ad, dude. Where's the fucking emotional journey on that one? It's just a fucking swordfish. Big fish.
At the 1923 Indianapolis 500, the top 3 finishers all used ethyl, and the demand for leaded gasoline took off. To keep up, Ethyl Corporation had to build a new chemical plant in New Jersey, but the project began terribly. Within 2 months of operating, dozens of workers fell ill with lead poisoning. 5 of them died. To address the public outcry, Midgley held a press conference, and there he poured tetraethyl lead onto his hands, and he inhaled it for a full minute.
Dude, that'd be so... We do this today. We need to have, like, the Sackler family get up there and prove that opioids aren't fucking dangerous by just fucking injecting fucking heroin.
He claimed he could do this daily without harm. But Midgley knew the dangers. The reason he had turned down the public talks was because he spent much of 1923 in Florida, where he himself was recovering from lead poisoning. He didn't go anywhere near his company's product if he could help it.
Dude, what a piece of shit.
Lead is dangerous even in small doses.
Holy, that's fucked up. That's so fucked up, dude. That's crazy. That's crazy work.
And like calcium, lead can be stored in bones for years, meaning it can continue to poison the body long after the initial exposure. The organ most sensitive to lead is the brain. Lead breaks down the myelin sheath around axons and prevents the release of neurotransmitters. That's why common symptoms of lead poisoning are headaches, memory loss, and tingling in the hands and feet.
Dude, I'm not kidding. This is so funny, but I don't even know how to properly explain this. I'm gonna try to explain this to you, but I don't know if I can properly explain this. When I'm learning a new skill, like I've been practicing shooting from a certain location in basketball. I've been like practicing the same shot over and over. I literally try to picture in my brain my myelin sheath on my neurons lighting up. I'm trying to create the groove. I'm not kidding. That's how I picture. I'm like trying to I can do the same thing every time. Anyway, I just thought I'll tell you the truth. I keep it real on this stream, all right? I keep it real. I'll tell you what I'm doing, embarrassing or not. Does it work versus a control group? I don't know. I mean, I practice something and I get better at it. I don't know if it works if I just didn't do this stupid visualing exercise.
And the dangers of lead had been known for hundreds of years. Already in 1786, Benjamin Franklin remarked that lead had been used for far too long, considering its known toxicity. You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced on. He would have been aghast to learn that nearly 150 years later, scientists planned to add lead to fuel. Doctors and public health officials from MIT, Harvard, Yale, and the US Health Service wrote to Midgley and warned them against producing tetraethyl lead. They called lead a creeping and malicious poison and a serious menace to public health. Their concerns were dismissed.
Well, there's money to be made.
This model shows how just the right amount of fluid containing tetraethyl lead and dye is added to the gasoline.
No one doubted that a lot of lead was bad for you, but how much harm could a little lead do? By the 1950s, millions of motorists globally were burning lead in their cars and releasing it into the air. Some of that lead ended up on Claire Patterson's zircon samples, preventing him from determining their age. In 1952, he moved to Caltech, where he built a new lab from scratch. Suspicious of environmental contamination, he tore the electrical cables out of the walls to remove the lead solder. He cleaned the floors and benches daily with ammonia and made sure that air was always being blown out of the lab. To go inside, you had to wear a plastic bunny suit.
Jeez.
Patterson basically invented the clean room. Inside that room, he turned his attention to the oldest rocks in the solar system, meteorites. All the original rocks on Earth had long since been destroyed by tectonic activity. But meteorites come from asteroids, which formed around the same time as Earth. They have just been drifting through space until they entered the Earth's atmosphere. So the best way to measure the age of the Earth was to measure the age of meteorites.
Patterson measured 5 meteorites, each with 3 different radiometric dating techniques, and he found they were all 4.55 billion years old. That number is within 0.15% of the currently accepted value for the age of the Earth. Before Patterson's experiment, people thought the Earth was 1 billion years younger. So Patterson had done it. He measured the age of the Earth. But he wasn't done getting rid of lead contaminants.
Public concern about lead exposure had continued to grow. But President of Standard Oil, Frank Howard, pushed back, saying, "We do not feel justified in giving up what has come to the industry like a gift from heaven on the possibility that a hazard may be involved in it."
Scientists funded by the Ethel Corporation claimed that lead was a natural part of our environment and therefore not harmful to people. But Patterson wondered, just how natural is the lead in our environment? And he had just the skills to find out.
That is something Dan Clancy would say, for sure.
He began by measuring lead in the oceans. If it were natural, he expected the concentration of lead to be the same regardless of depth. But if lead pollution had increased recently, it would be more concentrated near the surface. He took samples in the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans down to a depth of 4 kilometers. And sure enough, lead concentrations were nearly 10 times higher near the surface.
Yikes.
Lead pollution was clearly recent, but when exactly had it occurred? To find out, Patterson had to go to Greenland and Antarctica. Ice cores record the level of lead in the air going back thousands of years. The levels of lead in the atmosphere have been elevated for the last 4,500 years. All of it is due to human activity, mainly smelting ores to make metal.
We fucking love smelting ores. Just such a human thing, dude. Like, I feel like if humans hung out with aliens, they would say that's a human thing. Like, if there was a comedy show about humans on an alien planet, they'd be like, these fucking humans love smelting ores. They're always smelting. Like, if there was a Costco guys intergalactic TikTok and it was about things humans do and they're imitating humans, one of them will be smelting ores because we just fucking love doing it.
You can see the rise and fall of the Greek and Roman empires, the dip caused by the Black Death in the 1300s, and of course the spike in the 20th century due to industrialization and tetraethyl lead.
Yeah, let me see that again. That is you can't even see it because I'm covering it, but that's a pretty dramatic rise in lead. Like, that really spikes up. That could be a natural occurrence, though.
Well, Patterson looked at the lead levels in the teeth and bones of recently deceased Americans, and for comparison, he measured the lead in bones and teeth of Peruvian and Egyptian mummies.
Dude, this guy really went on a fucking journey to just find out that, yeah, I mean, it's pretty obvious that if all the gasoline has lead in it, it's going out into the air, it's going to be bad. I appreciate that he went to the fucking lengths to prove it.
Since they lived over 1,600 years ago, they would have been exposed to much less lead in their lifetimes. He expected to find modern Americans had about 100 times as much lead in their bones, but results showed it was closer to a factor of 1,000. 20th century Americans had 1,000 times more lead in their bones than their ancestors.
And at the time, 20th century Americans were the most powerful country in the world, bar none. So you could say in a way that lead was our superpower. You could say in a way that 1950s America, which is the most strong relative to other nations any country has ever been in human history, and we had 1,000 times the lead of other countries, you could say we need to bring back the lead. You could make the case that the only way for America to become great again is to return the lead to the gasoline.
Studies of baby teeth revealed that even lead exposure well below the level considered safe resulted in delayed learning, decreased IQ, and increased behavioral problems.
Dude, it's actually a tragic disappointment that teachers will never get to have students who are both lead poisoned and iPad brained. They can only get one or the other. I want to build this new super race of children who are both iPad kids and lead poison kids who can be truly degenerate, truly impossible, and post-COVID. Yeah.
A follow-up study showed that those with higher levels of lead in their baby teeth were many times more likely to fail out of high school.
That's crazy.
As a result of studies like these, the CDC's guidelines for the acceptable level of lead in children's blood dropped from 60 micrograms per deciliter down to 3.5.
Dude, it's funny to just ballpark 60 for the acceptable amount of lead in children's blood. That's your job. Your job is to set the right amount of lead for children's blood and be like, yeah, I haven't done any studies or anything, but let's go with 60. 60 sounds good. It's like, bro, you don't... We should start with probably 0 until we know it's safe, right?
And as far as we know today, there is no safe level of lead. Globally, lead is believed to be responsible for nearly 2/3 of all unexplained intellectual disability.
That's
According to a study
crazy.
published in 2022, more than half of the current US population, that's 170 million people, were exposed to high levels of lead in early childhood.
That's
Those born
crazy.
between 1951 and 1980.
Dude, no wonder boomers cooked the fucking world. Dude, no wonder. Oh my God, we've been fucking riding this boomer wave down for 30 years and they're all fucking lead poisoned from childhood. Flash forward exactly 30 years and some fucking kid is watching VR YouTube video about how millennials and Gen Z had microplastics in their brain. They've been cooking us for 30 years and they all have microplastics in their fucking brain. No wonder they've been running this fucking country into the ground. No wonder they got us into the space wars.
The authors estimate that in aggregate, lead caused a loss of more than 800 million IQ points. The world is less intelligent today because of leaded gasoline.
But there are even more troubling correlations. The US saw a steady rise in crime from the 1970s to the 1990s.
You know what's so fucked up is we are going to have a space war one day and there's not going to be a single goddamn lightsaber in it. That's fucked up. We're just going to fucking shoot guns at each other and fucking missiles and shit. There's not gonna be a single Jar Jar Binks making goofy, squeeze me. There's not gonna be a cool light. There's gonna be nothing. It's gonna be fucking like regular war, more boring and like impart. Probably gonna be AI powered fucking drones killing each other in space. What a joke.
Not a joke, because Palantir is an AI technology company that sells weapons to the US military. Since 2009, the government has spent $2.5 billion on Palantir products.
This graph looks eerily similar to a plot of preschool blood lead levels, just offset by 20 years. The obvious question is, did kids who were exposed to higher levels of lead grow up to commit more crimes than they otherwise would have? You might think this is just a spurious correlation, but the same pattern appears in many countries, including Britain, Canada, and Australia. And we know there's a causal connection between lead exposure and antisocial or violent behavior. A study of 340 teenagers found that those who were arrested were 4 times as likely to have elevated lead in their bones than similar demographic controls who didn't have run-ins with the law.
So if I'm a boomer and I kill you and I have a good enough lawyer, you think I could pull off could I blame it on the lead? If I get a good enough lawyer and I snap into a violent rage and kill you, could I instead sue the Ethel Corporation for making me that way?
Now, this doesn't mean that lead is responsible for all of the increase in crime, but it's very likely responsible for some of it. Now, it's tough to estimate the precise death toll of lead. One of its lesser-known effects is a hardening of the arteries, leading to increased cardiovascular disease. A study from 2018 found lead was likely responsible for 250,000 heart disease deaths per year in the US.
That's crazy.
Assuming a constant rate over the past century, that amounts to 25 million deaths in the US alone. Globally, the figure may approach 100 million. Most of those deaths are due to Midgley's decision to put lead in gasoline, a substance he knew firsthand was toxic, but he did it anyway to maximize profits. And the problem is not over. Current estimates of deaths caused by lead range from 500 to 900,000 per year. A 2020 UNICEF report warns that 1 in 3 children globally, that's over 800 million children, have blood lead levels at or above 5 micrograms per deciliter. A lot of this lead now comes from batteries and industrial processes, but some is still due to Midgley's invention.
Jeez.
Now, after Midgley's success with Ethel, he was put in charge of another engineering project. GM wasn't just making cars, but also household appliances. And fridges had a problem. The 2 most common gases used as refrigerants were methyl formate and sulfur dioxide. One is highly toxic, the other is flammable. Midgley was tasked with creating a safer alternative. And in 1928, he developed a non-toxic and non-flammable refrigerant, dichloro-difluoromethane. GM called this new product Freon. And to demonstrate Freon's safety, during the unveiling at the American Chemical Society,
this guy's got one note. This guy's got one party trick, and it's fucking inhaling chemicals he knows to be toxic in front of a crowd to trick them into making it public. He's fucking crazy. That's crazy to do it twice. The dude's just addicted.
Midgley inhaled a lungful of this gas and blew out a candle. In the following decades, CFCs like Freon became very popular.
Dude huffed a lungful of Freon in front of a crowd. That's so funny. We should have a better test than this, than just getting this guy up there to fucking yeah, just do galaxy gas or whatever fucking illegal shit.
The problem is CFCs are light and stable. When released into the atmosphere, they climb up into the stratosphere, where they can remain for 50 to 100 years. But if a CFC molecule is hit by an ultraviolet photon of just the right energy, it breaks apart, releasing a chlorine atom. And this chlorine atom can then react with ozone, breaking it apart into chlorine monoxide and oxygen gas. The result was another environmental disaster, the hole in the ozone layer. With less ozone, more UV light penetrates the atmosphere, increasing the rates of skin cancer and cataracts.
Oh, I didn't know we're doing fake fucking news here. I thought it was a science channel. I didn't know we're gonna just fucking make shit up. The ozone layer isn't real. God protects us from fucking rays. Okay? So I didn't know this was gonna get fucking stupid. Utter woke nonsense, dude. The only zone that matters is the end zone. That's damn right. That is damn right. I just got chills hearing that. Yes.
Plus, CFCs are potent greenhouse gases. Per kilogram, they produce 10,000 times more warming than CO2. The historian John McNeill wrote that Midgley had more impact on the atmosphere than any other single organism in Earth's history. An agreement to phase out CFCs, the Montreal Protocol, went into effect in 1989, and the ozone layer is now showing signs of recovery, although it'll take many more decades to fully recover. In 1940, at the age of 51, Midgley contracted polio and became physically disabled. So to help him get up, he devised a mechanical bed controlled by a series of ropes and pulleys. On November 2nd, 1944, while using the contraption, he became tangled in the ropes and died of strangulation.
Jesus.
His death was officially ruled a suicide, and some believe it was because he felt guilty about his invention.
Thanks to the work of Claire Patterson, it became clear that the lead in our environment is not natural. Burning lead in combustion engines spread the toxic element across the planet, into the air, oceans, the snow at the South Pole, and even our bones. Japan was the first to ban leaded fuel in cars in 1986, but other countries soon followed suit. Algeria was the last to do so in 2021.
Dude. They wanted to be sure. Damn. That's when you leave the party after the lights are on, dude. That's late. 2021 is late, Algeria. If you're banning leaded fuel post-COVID, that's crazy.
The UN calculates that the elimination of lead from gas saves over 1 million lives per year and $2.45 trillion.
Wow, much more important than
But
lives.
leaded gas is still used, by the way, in piston-driven airplane engines. That's now the largest source of lead emissions into the air in the US. You will observe with concern how long a useful truth may be known and exist before it is generally received and practiced on. When I first learned about Thomas Midgley and Claire Patterson, I was amazed by how much harm or how much good a single person could do to the environment, which brings me to the sponsor of this video, Wren.
Check them out. That was a good video. That was my favorite Veritasium video I ever watched. I thought it was paced well, and I learned at a steady pace, and it was relevant. I liked it a lot. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to stop huffing lead every night. I'll tell you that. Well, I'll cut back on it. I'm not going to stop on it because it makes me feel good, but I'm going to cut back. That put a whole new perspective on that hobby of mine.